On New Canadians, we're pleased to be with Shamira Madhany, Managing Director and Deputy Executive Director of World Education Services, also known as WES. Shamira, thank you for being with us today here in your home as we deal with the pandemic and our new situation. How are you?
I'm fine. And thank you for doing this interview remotely. We're all working remotely, so this is going to be really exciting.
I agree. Well, let's start the conversation right away with, your history in this space and with World Education Services. What drives you to be here and to continue to work for Newcomers in Canada?
Sure. So actually what drives me is my dad's passion. He passed away many years ago, and he came as an economic immigrant. We came from East Africa. He spoke English. He had an accounting background, and it was really hard for him to enter his former occupation. He actually ended up working at a golf club, basically picking up wet towels and cleaning washrooms, and that was really hard. I was young. I was in high school. And I felt that that shouldn't really happen to anybody, so I had made a decision, coached by actually a professor at a university who said, well, Shamira, you could actually talk about this, or you could make a difference. And I thought, I'm going to make a difference. So here I am at World Education Services 20 years later, wanting to have an impact and make a difference so that no immigrants who are highly educated would need to start where my dad did. They just need to bridge into their former occupation.
Oh, and goosebumps, because anyone can relate to that and have that resonate within them. But where did you start? 20 years ago, where did you think this is an opportunity for me?
Sure. So I started really quickly to think about, my background and history. After university, I ended up working for a not-for-profit organization called COSTI, where I was counseling new immigrants to go back into their former occupations. I moved fairly quickly after that into government, started with, again, frontline counseling, program design, policy development, and then had an opportunity, and which was a real honor, to work in areas where I could write policy and impact policy as an assistant deputy minister with Cabinet Office. So I think that I've been really basically fortunate. Serendipity plays a role, but I felt that I wanted to make a difference, and government gave me the opportunity to do that. World Education Services, it's almost pivoting, 20 years later when I think about where I started and where I wanted to be. World Education Services provides services to immigrants who want to get their academic credentials assessed from their home country to basically either Canada or US. And so that's what we do. We assess documents so that people know where they stand in the Canadian education system. And so for me, that's really making a difference in terms of what we do.
And since March 2020, for within the organization, outside of the organization, we've all had to pivot online. So what are some quick points you can give us about WES that allow us to know, we're fully able to transition and continue your work on an online, in an online way?
Sure. So at WES, what we were already looking at doing is digitizing our applications coming in. At this point, because we have a very stringent process where we need to make sure that the documents that come in are original documents, they come in and through mail, and then we verify that the documents are basically valid, etc. All that is done manually. What we did as a result of digitization and the pandemic actually expedited the situation is have direct discussions with countries and institutions so that the documents could come digitally in a secure format. And so we use the pandemic as a way to really pivot very quickly from paper-based to digitization. But this supports our applicants because it doesn't take as long. It basically means that we can get documents securely, and it compresses the time within which we're able to look at the documents and assess to Canadian standards. And it's been a real opportunity to have done that so quickly.
That was my next point. This is great for the highly educated professionals we just talked about. With educated professionals coming into the country, international students coming into the country. what are the situations like for the clients that you speak to on a regular basis?
You know, my perspective, and at least our experience, has been that individuals are just waiting. They're waiting for the borders to open, and they still want to come to Canada. We did a survey, in fact, of individuals from our top source countries, India, Nigeria, Philippines, to get a sense of, you know, do they still want to come given what's happening in their home countries and what's happening in Canada with our unemployment rates going up. And so what we got is that majority still want to come to Canada because they feel that they could make a difference in terms of their skills, and we know that we could benefit from their skills. So where they're at right now is getting ready. As soon as the borders open up, they'll put in their applications if they haven't already started. So they're just using the time to get ready, at least for those that are still overseas.
And that's a great point, that people in Canada choose to be here. We choose to make it a home. So the collective the collective sense is that we will work to volunteer our hours. You know, immigrants are more likely to volunteer their hours than I think any other group of people. Why do you think that is?
Immigrants want to contribute, and that even as they're waiting for the papers to get processed, to get the experience, and even the frontline jobs that they may take, the reality is that they want to be participating members of our country. And so they will contribute in different ways. It could be through their churches or mosques. It could be basically through their community organizations. It could be through a number of places. And that just tells you that they want to be here and they want to contribute even as they're waiting for the processes to go through.
And in your role, you see things from a policy perspective as well. Is the country able to manage immigrants as they come in to fill our labor gap?
So what I can tell you is that even before the pandemic, our country, basically nationally and also at each provincial level and municipal level, we have very progressive immigration policies. And so, in fact, what the federal government was doing already is making sure that people could contribute all across the country, not just the cities. And so there are a number of pilot projects that basically we had in place, the Atlantic provinces, the municipal projects, etc. When I think about the provincial governments, similar in nature in terms of leveraging skills that people bring. And if I look at local communities, we're in Markham right now, and our Mayor Scarpitti, is a huge proponent of leveraging people's skills. So I think that our country was ready even prior to the pandemic.
That's good to hear.
When you think about, post-pandemic, and, obviously at WES, we're monitoring what the situation looks like. Our unemployment rate went from what was full employment, 5.2%, to about 13% right now. And so one would think that as our unemployment rate is going up, how are people feeling about immigration and immigrants? And yet what we have seen with our federal government, with the support of our provincial governments, is we still want to bring immigrants in. And the message out there is that we're still a great country. And if you look at international students, as an example, the federal government made a decision in partnership with our post-secondary institutions that international students could apply to come, they could take the courses online, they could still stay in their home countries just for the health and safety of both countries, and that as soon as they're ready and our borders open up, they could come and contribute. So, from my perspective, the thing is that I think everybody understands why we need immigrants to come to our country.
Shamira, talk to us about the growth potential of the labor market and in relation to immigrants here in Canada.
Sure. So Rachel, I don't know whether many people know this, that in the coming years, 100% of our labor force growth is going to be from immigrants who are coming to us. And the reason for that is because our demographic profile. We have many more people retiring. And in fact, as a result of the pandemic, people have suddenly realized that they might not have had a life, and this is an opportunity for them to leave the workforce. Our birth rate has been pretty low, and so you don't have as many young people entering the labor market. And so, in fact, this is a really critical point in terms of how immigrants who are highly skilled will contribute to our economy. everybody sees that, and that's the reason why governments and even employers are playing a significant role in saying, we have experienced people, let's just leverage your skills and let's work with them.
And Canada has competitors, right? We have Australia, New Zealand that are attractive for
UK,
many folks. Yeah, so moving on from that, current pandemic, post-pandemic, what should we largely as a country, Canadians, do to make sure that newcomers are working, happy, and having the dream life that they're looking for here?
So, my perspective is that the questions you're asking me, if you asked my neighbors, they would say, sure, it's great. I live in a very diverse neighborhood. For me, I think the most important, Rachel, is the economy and competition.
Yes.
And our GDP and our supply chain. Because we're basically in a global situation from where our economic perspective works. So I think that when you ask me, so what should we do as a country? I think that the most important sector is the employment sector and employers. And they need to and are playing a very significant role because ultimately they're hiring immigrants, right? And so, as I basically look at what's happening as a result of the pandemic, what we have been doing at World Education Services as one of our priority areas is making sure that employer associations and employers understand that in the last 3 years, we brought 1 million immigrants who are highly educated, that they could contribute to our economy, that many probably didn't end up getting into the former occupations just because we didn't recognize their skills. And so what we are doing at this point is saying, while our borders are closed and while people are getting ready for the borders to open and for people to come, you have 1 million people in front of you who are highly educated, many in the health sector. And so why don't we basically make sure that we leave no one behind, that we take advantage of those skills in a way that's going to support our economy. So that's what we've been doing at WES, and we had a couple of Twitter chats where we worked with organizations across the country that are similar to what WES does. And we have had 2 Twitter chats where we asked a few questions. How should we share best practices? How can employers play a role? What could highly educated immigrants do? And we couldn't keep up with employers coming in, organizations, settlement agencies, individuals saying this is the right thing to do, here are the best practices. At one point, the last session that we had last week on July the 15th, we were basically number 1 when we were looking at the chat lines. Wow. And hockey was number 2. That was amazing.
Wow.
Hockey was number
really?
2, and the Twitter chat was number 1.
So it was trending.
It was trending
right.
number 1.
Wow.
So this tells me that people are really interested and keen. They're looking for practical solutions that are out there. Employers are doing a really good job.
Itching to chat and communicate with each other, right? So my next question was how can talented people in Canada who are new here find exposure? What should we do now adjusting to pandemic?
So, my advice to new immigrants and newcomers, especially as they're coming at a point when things are challenging, is have hope. My dad had hope. He made sure that what he did it was a job that he had, but at least, his children had opportunities. He had opportunities. He basically made sure that he contributed to his community. So that's the first, is, have hope because things do change. 2 is, we talked about at the onset, volunteer. Because volunteering gives you exposure. Now what you're going to say to me, but we're socially distancing, you can do it online. Literally they are looking for skills all over the place, whether it's marketing, communications, design issues or whatever else. So volunteer because people are looking for a pair of hands. That way you get more exposure. Number 3 is I think there is an opportunity right now to think about taking more education. Higher education. It's now online. The other way to do it is LinkedIn, and I use LinkedIn all the time, is a powerful networking source. And I guess the last piece of advice would be that we have so many communities in Ontario and in other provinces, smaller communities that are desperate for people. and desperate for skilled immigrants. And if there's a way that we could even think about those smaller communities and going there, it's a lot more intimate. You know, what international students have done and why they've been so successful is that not just going to a university or a college in a small community, they're contributing to the local community. You know, the accommodation and the houses are benefiting from students, the stores are benefiting, and that's what immigrants could do, is that it's a more close-knit community and they could contribute more and they'll, you know, hopefully find jobs a lot faster. So those are some of the points, at least from my past experience, that might be helpful.
Great. Well, Shamira, thank you so much, first of all, for being here. But second of all, for letting us be in your home. I hope we can come back and talk to you again.
Absolutely, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my passion, about the work that WES does, and best of luck to all the new immigrants who have come recently.